Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Gunatu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavati Tamastu Mavidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om peace, peace, peace. And good evening. We are continuing with the complete works of Swami Ramakrishnananda, one of the 16 direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. And we're in a group of lectures that was collected together in a book called For Thinkers on Education. And this particular chapter that we're in the middle of is called The Two Paths. And he's talking about how the West tended to take the scientific approach of looking outward into nature and trying to discover all of nature's secrets and analyzing everything and trying to find all the answers that way. And the East went inward and tried to discover the truths of the universe through the process of meditation and introspection. So we're in the middle of this chapter. We're going to go just one paragraph back from where we ended. And so let's start to read here.
Nature was conquered at every step and forced to yield her treasures. He has analyzed nature, and his labor has not gone in vain. All the multifarious conveniences of modern life are due to that patient toil. And no one will deny that the results are grand. But has all this led him any nearer the truth? Has it enabled him to solve the mystery of existence, to read the riddle of the universe? Has it brought everlasting peace and life to him? Can it ever do it? Let us take his own conclusions. He has demonstrated that matter is indestructible, that the whole universe is composed of matter. In other words, the universe is neither beginning nor end, either in time or space. It is infinite and eternal. And what is man? Is he not very finite? A 3.5 cubit form, with senses and mind, not by any means perfect, in a short span of life? Is he not indeed finite? True, he has multiplied the power of his senses 100, 1,000-fold. He can see far into space through his telescope. He can cover, if he pleases, hundreds of miles a day. But however fast he may go, however far he may see, an infinite beyond is always before him. His knowledge, wide and wonderful as it is, does but confirm his infinite limitations. For finiteness, be it magnified ever so much, is but infinitesimally small compared with infinity.
Yes, every finite thing is infinitesimally small compared to infinity. And of course, with our modern conceptions of space, we know that, of course, our observable universe has a boundary because it appears to be going away from us faster and faster. And so there's a boundary as to how far we can perceive the universe, because at some point it reaches the speed of light, and nothing can be perceived going faster than the speed of light. And so that gives us a boundary on our universe. So our observable universe is finite. And yet the whole universe seems to be so completely vast, unbelievably vast. The number of stars in our own galaxy is inconceivably large, and there are almost as many galaxies as there are stars in our galaxy. So you multiply those two numbers and you get something just completely incomprehensible. And of course, time is the same problem. We realize that we can look back into the history of human beings and perhaps recorded history seems to be maybe 3,000 or 4,000 years, and then you get to archaeological finds, and it seems like there's evidence of civilizations maybe 5, 10, 15,000 years ago. And what a tiny amount of time that is compared to the presumed 4.5 billion years that the solar system has existed, and perhaps the 13 some odd billion years that the universe has existed, if you take that particular model of the universe. Of course, there's now with the James Webb Telescope, a lot of questions come about from that model, and perhaps we'll need a new one. And of course, there is another possibility, is that the universe has simply always existed in this apparitional form. It's an apparitional universe, and we are perceiving it now, but it doesn't have a beginning because it's an apparition. Just as you take a mirage, there's no date on the lake that you're perceiving in the mirage. There's no beginning to it. And if you mistake a rope for a snake, there's no birth date for the snake because it's a mistake that you're making now. So all of these things have interesting philosophical conclusions. And science has gone a lot further even now than it was in Swami Ramakrishna's day. This was over 100 years ago that he's giving these talks. And yet, again, the more we know, the more we know that we don't know. It seems like we uncover more and more difficulties. We think we're going to get there. You know, just about the time Swami Ramakrishna was giving these talks, the physicists were very confident that they pretty much wrapped everything up, and there were just a few loose ends that they were going to have to figure out, and then they'd have all the physics worked out because Newton's laws were so wonderful. And then, of course, they discovered that these little odds and ends that weren't quite working out were not going to be worked out with Newton's laws, and they had to go into things like relativity theory and things like quantum mechanics, which made the physics much more complicated and really mystical in a way. So even though he's making the point that science goes on this outer path and the West and the East is going on an inner path, there's an interesting kind of circularity here. The West's outward approach is leading to a more mystical outlook on the nature of the universe, and leads people to want to go inward because they realize that the universe is very peculiar. All right, let's continue here.
But it may be said that though the individual man is finite, the human race is infinite, and therefore the accumulated experience of ages will at last make man the all-knowing and all-powerful master of the universe. This argument is apparently convincing, but looking into it a little carefully, it is found to be utterly futile. In the first place, what has man learned from the immense past? What has it brought him to? He knows today more than ever before that there is infinitely more to know. And how is he going to cover this yet unknown infinite? Where is the stop to the progress of knowledge? Seeing that knowledge is infinite, it's impossible, it's inconceivable that finite man shall ever be able to stand up and say, "The infinite universe is at my feet. I leave this heritage to the generation of mankind to come." The so-called scientific civilization of the West is therefore bound to be ever progressing, ever moving on to newer fields of beauty and power. But the culmination, the perfection, can never come. The struggle can never cease, and the victory never be won.
You know, even in the Eastern approach of going inward, there are many different levels. People might have a glimpse of a vision of some sort of mystical experience, and yet that's not necessarily the ultimate experience. Swami Ramakrishnananda used to say that spiritual life begins with samadhi. So we can see that the realm of the spiritual is also much more complicated than we might think. It's not just one simple conclusion that we can come to, but that it's a state which grows and grows and grows. And eventually, the only place to end is in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, where everything merges into the one, and there is no seer and seen. There is no subject and object. So there is no process of knowing anymore. You transcend the process of knowing. As soon as you're in the process of knowing, you're in a level of duality, and you haven't reached the final conclusion yet, whether you're talking about science or whether you're talking about mystical experiences. So in both cases, the realm seems to go on and on. All right.
Let us turn now to the path of the East. It begins by questioning the man himself. Why should it be assumed that the whole universe is for man's enjoyment? That he is distinct and separate from the universe? What is he made up of? Is not his body also made up of matter, and his mind too? Food maintains the body as well as the mind. Disease affects them both. The mind is material as the body, only it is finer. What then is that which makes the mind think? The senses perceive and the body move. The chair here does not move and the table does not think. Why? They too are material. Where's the difference then between man and the dull universe around him? By any manipulation of matter, can intelligent life be produced?
Yes, of course, this is the mysterious question of what is life. What is the difference between something that's not alive and something that is alive? And there again, we find it seems to go on a spectrum, and sometimes you get to things that it's difficult to determine whether it's alive or not. You get to things like viruses and retroviruses, and it's very difficult to say, well, this is something that's alive or something that's not alive. It can have properties of things that we normally associate with living things, like being able to reproduce. If it's in a living cell, then it can reproduce. But if it's not in a living cell of another organism, it can't reproduce. So to try to classify it as living or non-living becomes rather difficult. And almost any criterion you come up with for what is a living thing and what is not alive becomes very, very difficult. There really isn't a clear answer. You can give whole hours of lectures on all of this kind of debate as to what is life and how does it come about. And of course, the other interesting thing is that this idea of matter, and he says, what's the difference between man and the dull universe around him? And how does intelligence get produced? And I like to always point out that our sense organs that we think are very sophisticated and kind of one of the things that we would say are part of being alive is that you have the ability to perceive things and you know things in the universe. That's what makes you a conscious living being. And yet the sense organs that do that for us depend on the individual molecules in your eyes or your ears or your skin or your taste buds. All depend on the ability of individual molecules to respond to different kinds of energy, whether it's radiation energy or kinetic energy or magnetic energy or electrical energy. All of these kinds of forms of energies are able to interact with the matter, and the matter then, in a sophisticated form of a sense organ, is able to detect them and give us a sense of consciousness. So there again, the lines become blurred. Our consciousness seems to depend on the ability of individual atoms, which we would not call living or conscious by themselves. They have to be in combination to form a living organism for us to call them conscious or living. And yet our ability to perceive this universe depends on the individual atoms in the sense organs, in the molecules of the sense organs. So again, you end up with an inability to distinguish between one and the other, where one ends and the other begins. He probably won't get into that quite deep philosophical discussion here, but his point is that, of course, that our body is just a material, and our minds are just a finer kind of material, and that consciousness is somehow dependent on that. So let's continue with his arguments here.
By any manipulation of matter, can intelligent life be produced? Such questions were asked. The inquiry was made subjective and not objective as in the West. And are not the results of subjective inquiry bound to be far safer than those of the objective method? It is not folly to try to understand the subject through the object. Is not all objective knowledge bound to be imperfect? Without knowing the knower, can the known be ever known? Here in the East, too, the mistake was made, which the West clings to even now, as the only safe path. But the Aryan sages soon discovered their mistake, and giving up the search in external nature, turned their energies inward for self-analysis. They saw that self-knowledge was the only knowledge worth having, the only science worth evolving, and all other pursuits, the modern scientific pursuits, were left to the less analytical minds, to the lower castes. That is why in India we find that our architects, surgeons, traders, agriculturists, artists belong to the lower castes. The Brahmana is he who seeks Atmavidyananda. And he found that he is the spirit within which makes the body and mind act and think. It is the spirit behind the body and mind that distinguishes it from other material objects in the universe. Body and mind are instruments in the hands of the spirit. That spirit is the subject, the I in man, and the universe is the object, and these instruments are the verb. These three together make the complete and harmonious sentence of life. The spirit peers through the senses into the world, just as the astronomer sees the far-off star through his telescope. And as the spirit is by its nature infinite, the infinite universe can withhold no secret from its gaze. Therefore, man has to realize his infinite nature, to see that he is spirit and not either body or mind before he can gain victory in the great struggle. He has to go beyond the body and beyond the mind to reach this realization and to stand victorious.
Yeah, that's the age-old question. What's the difference between the living and the dead, or the quick and the dead, sometimes it's said. And there was a funny cartoon. There were two people sitting on each side of a table in an old Western saloon, and one of them had their head down like this, and the other was holding a smoking gun, and it was the quick and the dead. So that's the difference between the quick and the dead, the one that's quicker on the trigger. But even so, yeah, this mystery is, one moment the body is living, the next moment it's not living. Same chemicals, same kind of matters, all there, and yet something is missing. The spirit is missing. And so there's something separate from the material existence that is not material, that inhabits the body, the spirit. And it's very difficult to try to describe that in any kind of physical form. All right, let's continue with what he says.
It is easy to see that none but the ignorant or the animal man will care to live in the body alone. Most of us live both in the body and mind, though perhaps considerably more in the body than in the mind. But the intellectual man, the poets, painters, and philosophers of the world lived mostly in their minds, and the sages live in the spirit. They have realized that the body and mind are prison houses in which the spirit is bound, and unless these go, freedom will never come. These walls dim the luster of the effulgent spirit, just as a black paper around this dome will make this classroom dark. But is it not impossible to go beyond the body and mind? Will that not mean death? No. Every day of your lives, you're going into that devoutly to be wished for state when you are in deep sleep. You are perfectly unconscious. The world with its joys and miseries has vanished for you. You behave in every respect like a dead man. You do not move, you do not think, feel, or will. But sleep is not death, because the spirit is there. A push or call brings you back to consciousness, and you remember everything you did before sleep. And mark this, that you enjoyed a sound sleep. You are conscious that you were unconscious for a time. This memory of consciousness would be impossible unless you had experienced it. So it is possible to go beyond the body and mind, but you do it in a fit of overpowering sleep, and therefore are none the wiser. While the jnani does it consciously, and therefore becomes all-knowing and all-conquering.
And of course, then you get the interesting experiences of people that have had near-death experiences where their body has been clinically dead. The brain waves have stopped, the heart stopped, all the normal signs of indication that the body is alive have stopped, and yet there seems to be a continuation of consciousness. And such people report having a consciousness of being out of their body and seeing the picture below of their body and whatever is happening, whether that's they've been in an accident or whether they're in the middle of surgery or whatever it is, they're able to perceive these various things. And they even perceive conscious entities that have also passed on. They perhaps see other people that have passed before them, and sometimes those people will tell them that it's not their time and they have to go back. So all of these different interesting conscious experiences are happening without the body and the mind. So our consciousness is not dependent on a body and a mind. It is independent of that. Our current body and mind are simply the vehicles through which consciousness is currently experiencing the world. But as the deep meditators have experienced, the consciousness is not dependent on that, and you can reach a higher state of consciousness that is not dependent on the body and the mind. You've transcended the mind in your deepest meditation and samadhi. All right, let's continue.
The sages of the East have thus realized their self and conquered nature, and therefore their civilization is perfect. Theirs is the path to victory. The children of those great sages have forgotten their spiritual nature and even think themselves more helpless than the children of the scientific West. For the European or the American believes in himself, his immense faith in his own energy and resource, and this faith in himself and the irresistible power of the spirit within is at the root of all his success. But we have lost faith in ourselves. We imitate. But imitation can never make man a victor. Let us revive the old, strong, pure faith in the power and glory of the Spirit. Let us remind ourselves that we are spirits unconquerable, all-knowing. Let us remember that matter is the servant of spirit, not spirit the servant of matter. Let us tread the path which the sages trod and follow their footprints, and then indeed we shall see that the civilization evolved by the Aryan sages, our great forefathers, is alone perfect, and that their path is alone the path to victory in the great battle of life.
Yes, trying to realize the true nature of this universe really lies in understanding that it's the spirit that is perceiving a universe through the power of Maya, that in reality what we perceive as space and time and the process of causation within space and time is taking place within a framework of matter and energy. So time, space, matter, and energy, those are all the you could say the theater in which Maya is doing its play. And you have to realize that all of those elements are really a perception that's happening to you. And it's that perception that creates this manifestation. So in order to realize the truth behind it, you have to realize that there is a oneness behind matter, energy, time, and space. There is that oneness behind it. And again, it's interesting that the West is the scientific West has come up against that inscrutableness of nature. They've discovered that matter and energy really are different manifestations of the same thing, and that space and time really do depend on each other, and they're intertwined in a very peculiar way in the universe that we perceive. And so the West not really being able to consider the idea that there is an unfathomable oneness behind the universe fails to understand what they've really discovered. They've really discovered that there is a oneness behind the whole universe. Matter and energy, space and time really are all out of oneness, and that it manifests as an apparent universe. And as soon as it manifests as an apparent universe, it manifests in pairs of opposites. It manifests as a subject and an object. So the subject is perceiving the object, but the subject and object are coming out of the oneness. So you can't say that the subject creates the object or that the object creates the subject. You see, that's the difficulty with materialists. They take this material universe and they think they're going to get consciousness out of it. They're going to get the spirit out of it. They're going to get the mind out of it. But you can't do that. So it's because they both arise simultaneously out of the oneness. And so there's an equal footing, in some sense, between the two that's inscrutable until you realize that higher self. And of course, he points out that the scientists can pass on their knowledge from one generation to another by teaching it, but really the saints can also pass it on. They pass it on simply by their presence, and you feel something different in the presence of someone who has realized that highest realization, that has had the highest level of samadhi. And of course, the great ones like Swami Ramakrishna and Vivekananda could give spiritual experiences to people. But even lesser people that have experienced spiritual realizations can give you a hint of that. They give you that feeling that there's something beyond this universe just by being in their presence. All right, so we can continue next with the next chapter, Heaven and True Happiness. Let's continue with that.
Whenever any exertion is made, the end is happiness. Happiness is the goal of all living beings, animals and men. But the ordinary happiness of the world will never satisfy man. Nowhere in creation can he find lasting satisfaction, not even if he rises to the highest heaven. Only when he has gone beyond all the heavens can he hope to escape from the revolving wheel of birth and death. What is heaven? It is not a place where man realizes his perfect nature. My master, Swami Ramakrishna, used to tell us there are chains of iron and chains of gold, but both are chains and they bind. Heaven is the chain of gold which binds man and does not allow him true freedom in any way. Yet when man puts the question to himself whether he wants to be a slave or to be free, the answer always comes that he wants to be free. The slave is never happy, for at every moment he's at the command of the master. And just when he's enjoying most, he may be called away to do something else. But if we are not free in heaven, why should we seek it? Is there no other way by which we can find freedom? Vedanta says yes, and it shows us how we may attain not an impermanent heaven, but everlasting blissfulness.
You know, again, it's interesting how often the words peace, love, and freedom come up as our goals of life. And from one analysis, it comes about this way. If you think that Brahman's nature can best be described as being infinite, undivided, and unchanging, and we're misperceiving the Brahman to be something else, what is that something else? Well, if it's really infinite, the only else there is to see it as finite. And if it's really undivided, the only else is that you're seeing it as divided. And if it's really unchanging and you're mistaking it for something else, the else is the changing. So we live in a world that's finite, divided, and changing, but our real nature is infinite, undivided, and unchanging. So why do we seek for freedom? Well, it's because our true nature is infinite. If you're infinite, you're completely free. And so we seek for freedom. That's our normal way of thinking of being infinite in this world of Maya, is to seek for freedom. And similarly, if you are truly that undivided oneness, then you seek love in this world. You want to be one with somebody or some group. You want to be loved by people. And that gives you a feeling of oneness. And if you really want if you're really the unchanging reality, but you feel that everything is changing, you're getting old, you're going through diseases, your moods change from one moment to the next, all of these things, it appears that you're changing all the time, and yet deep down inside you know that you're really not this changing reality, that you're really the unchanging reality. And so that's why we seek peace, that peaceful, blissful state of the unchanging. And so in this particular paragraph, he was going after that idea of freedom and showing that we're really going after that in our lives. We're trying to find that ultimate freedom, and that heaven isn't that ultimate freedom. Now, one way of looking at heaven is that it gets you so close to that ultimate reality that you can, if you reach that heavenly abode and you're sufficiently prepared spiritually for it, then you will be able to then make the next step and go into the infinite, undivided, unchanging Brahman, go through to the everlasting peacefulness. If you need a few more lifetimes to work out a few more details, then you'll be born back in the world again. And again, when you look at people that have either had memories of past lives, a lot of times little children will remember the in-between state, in between their previous life and this life, and they'll tell you, well, I had more lessons to learn, and so I had to come back. Or they'll say that, if you don't learn your lessons, then you have to come back and learn them. It's amazing what these little kids will tell you just off the top of their head. And they'll tell you that they picked their parents because that was the situation that was best suited for them to learn the new lessons and so forth. So these things seem to be corroborated by the memories of people that have had a memory of a past life and the time in between. All right, so let's continue here.
Sense pleasure, even the highest, can never be eternal, because all the senses are perishable. For this reason, pleasures that come through the senses are invariably accompanied by fear of loss, and that spoils all real enjoyment. Man runs after sense pleasure because he does not know that he has within himself all happiness. His desire is based on ignorance, and whatever is based on ignorance, we should avoid. If we study the different descriptions of heaven, we readily see that it's only a place of continued festivities or enjoyments. Therefore, heaven should never be our ideal, for the scriptures tell us that we must overcome all desire for enjoyment, whether in this world or in the next. Salvation does not consist in going to heaven. It consists in realizing that I am God's child. If I am a dualist, or that I am one with God, if I am a monist, so long as happiness is sought in that which perishes, it will never be found. Happiness is in you. You take a sweetmeat because you think that in eating it you will be happy. Yet the enjoyment that comes from it is not in it, but in you. You seek that which harmonizes with your nature. You try to avoid that which does not harmonize. When you find something that harmonizes, you say you're happy. When you come in contact with something that does not harmonize, you feel unhappy.
Yeah, and of course, when you think about something that has given you some pleasure, then think of it as unending. Suppose you just saw a movie and you really enjoyed the movie, and then you picture that you are trapped in watching that movie over and over and over again, and you pretty realize that that's not the ultimate way to be happy. That's a very fleeting kind of pleasure. I remember somebody described to me what they do in Weight Watchers, at least they did years ago. If, say, you just can't resist chocolate, they'll just stuff chocolate down your throat and make you eat it until you're just sick of it and you can't stand it anymore. And you get over your addiction to eating sweets and chocolates and things. And so it's this idea that things bring us pleasure, but when you really think about it, we need change in this world. We can't take the same pleasure over and over and over again. It just becomes either monotonous or sickening. And so we have to seek things afresh all the time. So, all right, let's, I think we have time for another paragraph. Then we'll just say a little bit about the holidays since we're running into those. Okay.
Man is a combination of matter and spirit. Matter, because it is limited and changeable, breeds unhappiness. And when man's material nature asserts itself, he becomes unhappy. When, on the contrary, he's able to detach himself from his material being by discovering his true nature, then matter has no more power over him. Nothing can make him unhappy. It was thus that Christ could pray for his enemies when on the cross. Those who reach this state never get angry. They never wish to do harm to anyone. They even regard those who injure them as friends. If you study yourself, you will find that you're naturally happy. It is because you mistake your nature that you become unhappy. Instead of identifying yourself with spirit, you have identified yourself with matter, with your bodily conditions, and for that reason, you feel yourself miserable and unfortunate. To save you from this mistake, the great teachers all try to make you realize that you are pure and perfect.
Yes, and of course we're coming about the Christmas season here. And the symbolism of Christmas is very much tied into the symbolism of the winter solstice, which we just had a couple of days ago, where the sun reaches its lowest point in the sky and the days are the shortest. And then after that, the light tends to increase. Every day, the days get a little bit longer. And so this is a wonderful symbolism, and that's why the Christmas holidays was really put on this particular season. If you study the Bible and you see what happened during the birth of Christ, it probably wasn't at this time of year. It was probably more towards late winter or early spring. That's when the shepherds would have been out in their fields tending their flocks by night. But it was put this time so that it would tie into the pagan beliefs of the solstice and tie into their existing festivals. And so a lot of what we celebrate this time of year is really celebrating this increase of light. And so what I like to think is that just as the days are getting longer and longer and increasing the light in the outside, so in our spiritual life, we want to increase that inner light inside. And so through our prayers and meditation, that's what we're doing. We're increasing that inner light inside, getting a brighter and brighter picture of that inner light. Light is the symbol for spiritual experience. Many times people will tell you to meditate on a flickerless flame inside the heart, and they'll tell you to picture a light inside your heart that's expanding throughout you, that you're sort of infused with a beautiful golden light, or perhaps a meditation where you picture a rainbow of light through all your chakras and so forth. So there are many different meditations that involve this idea of light and generating that light from the inside of you, not necessarily just outside. And so on Christmas, we have Christmas trees decorated with lights. We have candlelight celebrations. Candle is another great symbol for light, and it's also the symbol for transmitting light. So just as you can, if you have a lit candle and somebody else has an unlit candle, you can light their candle. And that's the symbol for what a guru does when they impart the mantra to you. They have that inner light within them that is followed down the path of the gurus, and they are then lighting your candle so you can then realize that inner light within yourself. And of course, in our tradition, we recognize Jesus as one of the great avatars that brought light into the world. And that's frequently the way it's said, you are the light of the world. You've brought light into the world. And all the avatars do that in their different ways, in their different times and different places. So the Christmas season really is a nice time to have it at this winter solstice, whether it was the time of Jesus' birth or not. It's a nice time to have it because we can combine that symbolism of that inner light increasing along with the increase in light of the days and the increase in the seasons. So when you're at home celebrating the Christmas season, you can remember that Jesus was the light of the world at that time and is still the light of the world for millions and millions of people. And his teachings can still be enlightening to us, especially when you read them in light of something like Vedanta. Vedanta will give you a clearer perspective on teachings. The teachings get handed down, they have to be translated from one language into another. The language of 2,000 years ago isn't always completely understood. So sometimes the translations of things are not as clean and easily understood as we might like. But when we look at in light of the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, we can understand the teachings of Jesus even better and get a greater enlightenment from them by comparing them and looking at them from that other perspective. So a lot of things have to be looked at symbolically and looked at as metaphors for different experiences. And so when you look at it that way, rather than trying to make things too literal, you get a much better perspective. So if you're celebrating Christmas at this time, in the next few days, please try to keep that in mind, that the teachings of Jesus can enlighten you, and the teachings of Vedanta can help to enlighten the teachings of Jesus, and vice versa. So it's a wonderful way to synthesize all of these things together. We don't picture different religions fighting each other. They're not here to fight each other. They're here to enlighten us, and we need to realize the harmony among the different religious traditions in order to understand them better. The more you can see the similarities, the more you've gotten the true understanding of all of them, rather than distortions of them. So we wish you a very Merry Christmas in this Christmas season. Tomorrow, we'll be having a Christmas program at our Orange County Center in the morning from 10 to 12, and we'll be having a Christmas Eve service here in the evening, right immediately after Vespers. Vespers is at 6, and then the program will start immediately after that, and we'll go for about an hour and a half after that. And then, of course, Sunday we'll have a lecture as well. All right, we'll close with a chant. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om peace, peace, peace. Where's your light?
Thank you guys for your service.
Oh, thank you for coming.
My name is Josh.